Hello everybody, here we are.
Hello everybody.
Hi.
I'm Sandy.
And I'm Al.
And we are here with our kickoff podcast of 2020.
Of the Roaring Twenties. Speaking of which, you shared that that musician that was playing
Every pop song in
yes, in
Roaring
the Roaring
20s
Twenties music, and I thought that was really interesting, and that's actually a really good jumping off point. Is when we look at the 20s of the 1900s, 1920s and on, and you look at how the world was changing, it was a pretty exciting time, post-World War I, and everything that had drawn the universe. Today we're so connected, and World War I was happening back then, but the people at home didn't get the same perspective, didn't get the same connection to it. And as that ended, and that took many years, and it took years to filter out all the information, the 20s became this roaring time of change, and especially in the youth, the women's rights and the things that happened and things that were changing and were going on. And it became a really cool, iconic time for us. And I would like to see the 20s of the 2000s be an equally cool time in its own way, because it's modernized. It modernizes different. Clearly, the music will be different. Although it was fun to hear the music of the 20s played in the, a current song in the 20s style. But I think there's something magical in thinking about that, and I've talked a bit about that the Roaring 20s, because it was this time of real change, of real significant moving forward in humanity, and it wasn't just little things were happening. I think really big things were happening, and why I'm so connected to it. Now, I'm as old as I am, but my mother and my father were born in the early 20s. My mother was born in 1921, and my father was born in 1922, and that's probably what draws me back. Now, this is weird. This is one generation. This isn't my grandparents or my great-grandparents. This is my mother and father, and the culmination of them is me. And they were born during that period of time, and maybe that's the fascination, attraction to it. But also when we look at how much changed in that period of time. And that's why for me, I've been thinking about the Roaring Twenties in terms of this decade has left me really excited. This coming decade about what it can be and what it will be in my life. And it's really been an interesting reflection, because we're 3 days or 4 days into that period of time. And or 5 days, what is it, the 5th, 4th, 3rd, whatever it is. And I'm pretty fired up about what 2020 and beyond looks like. So maybe a good spot to jump off is, what does the near future look like? What does the current future look like? What do we see going on in our lives? What do we see happening in the world around us moving forward?
Well, interestingly, when we were talking about people that were born in the 20s, I discovered that all of my grandparents were born in the 20s. So my grandpas were born in 22 and 23, and my grandmas were born in 28 and 29. And I actually in 2019 lost both of my grandmas. So
but we're born in the
pretty
late 20s.
Eventful year, although I do understand the energy that you're seeing in the upcoming years. I think there's been a bit of a cultural shift into more of a celebration of entrepreneurs and small businesses, and I think a lot of people are understanding that to a greater extent, which I think is really good. And I know when it comes to living legendary and the path that we're on and the people that we get to work with, it is magical. I had a moment yesterday where what was I doing? I was looking through something or photos and organizing things, just looking at some of the projects that we've been able to do in recent timing, so like in the last year. And then of course with all of our service roster, we have customers that go back to the 80s. And everything in between. So like the people that we get to work with, it's just magical. And I had a moment that, we were talking a little bit around the first, what do I see for this year? And I know that my biggest responsibility or role is still putting our message together, putting our story out there so that we can attract more of these awesome people. And that's like my main mission, is just to make sure that we keep attracting them into our lives so that we can begin building, magic for people like that.
It's crazy to think. So 2 points. First off, you mentioning your grandparents born in the 1920s. Just so you know the difference between us, all of my grandparents were born in the 1880s. Just putting it out there. Anyway, I think about the 1980s, and you're talking about some of our customers from then. And I think of those early customers' lives that I was involved with in the 80s. And I think they're still in our lives, which is sensational and mind-blowing, really, to put in perspective that you could have faith in a company that long, that 30-some years later, you're still allowing them to be in your life and service
Faith in
people.
the company,
it's amazing.
or faith
Both.
in the people?
Both. I mean, I don't know that there's one or the other, but when I think back to that and I go, wow, that's amazing to think that over 30-some years we've been able to take care of those same customers. It's pretty sensational. Yeah, really fortunate. But anyway, moving forward, so we've kind of went back and looking at the past. The future, I think, is, again, it's all a mental thing. And I've been reminded of that so much recently, that how powerful the mind is and the mindset, and making that decision to every day be happy and to be engaged in what you're doing and love the experience. And I would like to kind of spend a little time there, because I know that you and I each have independently had mental shifts, mind shifts, and maybe let's even go over the last decade, over the last 10 years of how we've changed. And yet we're still the same basic people, but I think I know for me that I'm more of a believer than ever of having a good attitude creates good results, loving the thing that you do, whether or not it's necessarily, quote unquote, in the fun pile of life's experiences. You still find a way to love the experience, because it's the experience, no matter whether it's a good thing, like a yummy thing to do, or maybe at one point I would have thought it was a terrible thing to do. But when you look at something that's just not fun to do necessarily, but you look at it with a new set of lenses and you say, this is a great thing, I get to do this. And that's been the pool business for me, because you well know that there was a period of time where there was nothing fun about it for me. I was doing it because I had to exist, I had to live, I had all the same expectations of life and job and bills and blah, 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 blah. And yet that exact same stuff that I would do today, I'll find a sense of joy in doing it. Is this stuff any different? Well, some of it is, but in general, it's the same stuff, maybe differently applied. But what I dreaded in the past to do for all kinds of reasons, I found a way of loving to do today. And therefore, I don't have a bad day. And we've had recently Mike Lane coming back. Now, Mike is an old friend, and a very old friend of mine, going back to my childhood, and certainly through my early years of the pool business, Mike Lane was involved way back in those days and worked on and off for years, and now he's back for a brief period of time, and he certainly can express the difference that our company is, but he's a really good reminder of kind of where I came from and how much I struggled in those years to find joy in what I was doing. And now those same tasks that years ago I wouldn't have found the same joy in, I'm just finding a way of loving. And it's really amazing, because that's the mindset. Nothing changed in the work, but everything changed in the work, because this changed.
Well, speaking of changes, we now have Goldens on the job all the time. like Briggs.
Or on our laps.
Although Briggs
or...
is more at the office with me. He's my pal, but apparently he wanted a cameo. So I do know in this last week when I had a significant shift. So we finished up 2019 working on the Once Upon a Time pool, magical. And we haven't had the official kickoff party yet because we got such an early winter, like it was snowing and frigid temperatures, and we had just finished the pool, gotten water in it, the hot tub was up and running for a little while, but that one, it doesn't feel anywhere near complete, I think, just in my mind, because we haven't had that kickoff. And we've been working on the lazy river as well, which that early winter turned into fall
a long,
again,
gentle winter,
and we're still working in January, and it's supposed to be 50 degrees all week in Michigan. Anyway, the significant shift for me in the project, the Lazy River, which we've been working on, and I've been out to a few times to get the progress, as well as our team taking photos and videos, and we invented that construction cam so you can see every day what's going on there. Hey Briggs, watch out, I want the people, I want to see the people. Thank you, buddy. Good boy. So I've seen the project and everything going on, and you went live on the job the other day, and it was a 10-minute live. You were showing, Katie was at the job interviewing Kaylee, and then you walked us around. And from the time that I had been there last, which was right before Christmas,
not that long, right?
There's so much more going on. And one of the things, I know a lot of like pool builders and pool companies follow us, and I'm in a lot of groups online with the pool people, and there's many different ways to do things, and there's a lot of different segments of the industry, as we've discovered. And having other people in the industry see what you do is a vulnerable position, because the fear of critique will always be there. And I had such a monumental shift watching that live, just personally, about the depth and scope and intensity of this project, that I shifted into an even new appreciation of it. And then I wanted to share it. So I shared in the Pool Industry Mastermind group that I moderate, and I don't normally share in there. And as I was listing, I wanted to introduce it. So it was your live. So basically I just shared that video in it. And I said, in case you wanted to know what we work on, this is a hybrid Lazy River Infinity Edge pool. Happens to be a themed fishing village, and we're at a residential home in Michigan. Like, just stringing those things together, and of course, you know, there's so many more features in there. There's the sun shelf, there's the spa, there's the swim through grotto, there's the bridge you jump off of, there's 3 equipment pads, there's the fishing shack with the surge tank and the dock, and then there's, you know, beyond that is the pond and everything else. Like, that's just freaking epic. Like, words don't express the project. And as you were walking around, I know Karen and Jesse weren't on site that day, but Kaylee and Zach and you and Mike Lane were, and Katie was filming. And the people that you build that with is such a small crew, such a small team of people. You know, Frank's been instrumental in the construction end of the buildings on this project and on Once Upon a Time. And Karen and Jesse and Kaylee and Zach do the bulk of the heavy lifting and putting in the patios and putting in the different things. So like the team is really dialed in. It's a great size, and again, just back to the scope of what we build. And everybody just kind of goes out there every day and does what's next. And then you turn around and look at it, and it's this massive spread of things going on that looks like it's been there for a really long time.
Well, It is massively cool. And I think seeing it through your eyes then as you described your shift helped me realize how big it is. And there's a lot going on. And because we do this every day, and I'm seeing the incremental changes, I see that every single solitary little moment of change, I don't think I've recognized how big it is until mentally seeing it through your eyes when you express that wow, it just took on a life of its own. And I recognize there's so much going on there that I can't even fathom kind of a customer's perspective. Like, they don't know what they're getting. They know it's going to be cool. They trust and believe in us that it's going to be cool. But then they say, well, what's that going to look like? Because for so long, here's this, looks like a big 40-foot long blob of concrete that's actually a river, it's a cave to go through. And they look at that so long and go, like, what could that possibly be that's cool? And now we have these buildings spring up with all kinds of color and all kinds of cool genre and feel of stuff going on around it to give it this sense of this fishing village in the Caribbean with this river running through it and this, all of those things, and boats upon boats being used in cool ways. And it has to be a unique experience. It has to be something that's absolutely not unexpected. I would imagine they expect something. They just don't know what they're going to expect. But then to get that is, I would hope it's really cool, because it's the life and soul and heart of who I am as a human being. I think that while all of these amazing people you just mentioned them are doing these individual pieces to make all of this happen, it turns out that it's my palette of paint. I mean, they're the artists doing the painting, but I'm the one, guiding them
you
into what
invented it in your mind.
Right,
first.
right. It was purely in my mind that they're helping bring to life, and there's a vulnerable part of that because I don't want it to not be better than I could have imagined. There's a sense inside of me that I always strive for it to be better than I could have imagined, and if it's not, I'm disappointed. So going into a project, it needs to become better than I could possibly have imagined it to be, or I will be disappointed in me and the result of the project. And that's a lot of pressure, but that's also this amazing space of how can I constantly reinvent myself. And we've been doing these signs and things here lately, as you've seen. Ask me how many times I've ever done those signs in my life.
What do you mean?
0. I've never painted signs like this before in my life. And the inspiration, and the signs turn out really cool. The inspiration was, I was on Pinterest looking for, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I was on Pinterest. I know enough about the skills to do all that, but I never put them together to create a sign. I was on Pinterest looking for fishing villages and whatever, and I ran across the thing that said how to make a vintage sign. And I thought, interesting. And I clicked on it, and it was technically a video someone had posted on Pinterest on how to make a vintage sign. And it was something absolutely not interesting at all to me, what they were making. The vintage sign didn't matter at all to me. But all it took was a moment to say, well, duh. And the first one actually, like that one required carbon paper. What they painted the sign, or they painted a piece of wood, and they were stenciling over it. And what they said is, print these letters and use carbon paper. I don't know what they called it, but it's technically carbon paper from when I was a kid, and just copy it on there and then paint it and then do a little accent or something. And that was all I needed to go, well, wait a minute, that gives me an idea. And we didn't have carbon paper. So as you well know, because you helped me, cut the letters out of paper, and we put them on a sign that I had painted, and I put a border on it, and I had sanded it off to think that it would make it look, they had talked about hitting it with a hammer or something to make it look old, and instead I thought it'd be better just to sand it. And so I had sanded that thing, and I brought it, and I asked you to help me print these things, and you printed them, and then you helped me cut them out, and I traced around the edges, and that was the first sign. And then, of course, you got me carbon paper on Amazon or wherever you got it.
Yeah.
And magically now I could just lay the carbon paper down and stencil it on there and paint it, and then sand it and weather it and add some accent and different that. And And here we go, how many signs later, which I was thinking about that as I was painting. Oh, I was sanding one.
So here's a guy who can build anything out of his imagination and concrete and everything else. And like the epiphany of the last week was you can make a vintage sign.
Right. Well, and think about that. All the cool things I've done, I just never taken my skills and done that thing. And one little, probably 30 seconds of a 10-minute video, I never watched the whole thing. It didn't matter what the end result was. It was just, it was a mind shift.
Somebody giving you permission.
Yes.
Or
it's kind of like the very first time, and let's go way back when I met Albert, and Albert was the guy who taught me to carve rock out of concrete, and to me it was unbelievable, because the only thing I'd experienced before that was, I'm sorry, I'm digressing, but I think this is important. I had gone to a pool show in Phoenix, Arizona, and way back when, in those early shows for me, they would actually build a swimming pool. Because part of the demo was they would show you gunnighting, they would show you these different things. Well, in the back of the convention, there was a parking lot where they had built a gunite pool. They'd shot a gunite pool. It was only like 2 feet deep or whatever, but one of the demonstrations that day that I was there, the few days that I was there, was artificial rock installation. Now that just is normal. That's just normal words for us. But 25, 26, 27 years ago, there was a little bit of that going on. Now it's normal. Everybody does artificial rock and things. But there was a company that was demoing these precast stones. And they made a mold of a stone, and then they would make a copy of it out of concrete, and it was like this thick of like a fiberglass. It's called GFR now. GFRC molds are what they are, and what they are is they're concrete reinforced molds of concrete. And what you do is you build the shape of it, you copy a rock with rubber or latex, and then you use that as a mold, and then you put GFRC in there. It's actually what it's called, and it's a mixture of Portland cement, sand, and a ton of fiber. And you basically fill the mold with all of that, and it's only a ½ an inch thick or 1/4 inch thick, and you let it set up, and when you pop the mold out, now you got this fake rock there, which now they make them for well tops and all these different things.
Selling them
at
Michael's.
Anywhere.
I saw them
Absolutely.
today,
Yep,
like
anywhere.
$50 a pop
So
for a
for a rock. So 25 years ago, these GFRC molds just barely existed, and this company had made them, and they were demonstrating putting them on the side of a pool. And in their booth, they had this spa that was lined with this thing, so you could make it out of these GFRC panels. They didn't call it that at the time. It was whatever. But I watched this guy install this thing, and he literally picked it up, set it on the edge of the pool, and it kind of fit to the shape of the pool. And then he whipped up some mud and mixed it up, and he filled around the edges. And then they like put a couple of them together, and they battered this mud together to make them seamless, like two pieces stuck together. And then they went in there and they used these little tools, and they sort of carved these shapes to make them now not just look like they've been mudded together, but then like they were individual rocks. And then they painted them, and I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. This is just, how is that even possible? So that was my first introduction to that, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. Never worked in Michigan. This was in Arizona that this was happening, and I thought, Michigan, 1 or 2 freezes, that thing, you know, that joint would crack apart, and all of a sudden you'd have a broken piece here and a broken piece there, because they would never handle the freeze. And whether they do or not, I don't know. But that led me to, not that many years later, meeting a guy named Albert, who hand built out of cages of steel and metal mesh these shapes of rocks, put them in place on the edge of the pool, and then he covered them with concrete, and then he covered them with another layer, and then he carved into them and made them look into rock. They look like actual rocks, and I was just blown away by that it was even possible. But all that took for me was to see it once, and here's the whole reason for the story, was I saw it, and I was amazed. And I remember that first day I went to that job where Albert had been, and hanging off, and I've told the story many times, hanging off the side of this wall was this big, what looked like a 5,000-pound boulder. It was a big, massive rock. and it was all hollow, and it was made out of concrete, and it looked just like a boulder. And I took a Polaroid picture of that I carried around for a long time. Yeah, Polaroid, a while ago. Now we just take pictures all day long with our phones, and it's no big deal. But at that time, can you imagine? You bought a 10-pack of Polaroid pictures for about $10. They were $1 a piece to produce. Click the picture, it came out, and you waited for it to develop itself. And it was about $1 a piece that many years ago.
Oh, they're Polaroids more expensive now.
Yeah, well, it was pretty expensive then. So when you took a picture, it had to mean something. When you took a normal picture that was on film, at least to develop a film that was, 24 pictures cost $6 or something. But this was $1 a piece for a Polaroid.
And now I go out to Lazy River and I'll take
1,000
300. I'll take 300 photos in an hour.
Yeah.
Of everything going on.
Yeah. So that tells you how long ago we're talking about. But I had a Polaroid picture of that boulder hanging off that wall, and I carried that around for a long time because that was a significant mind shift for me. That while I thought I knew what concrete was, I did not know what it could be until I saw what it could be. And that's the day that I saw what it could be, and I knew that I could do that. If someone else could do that, I could do that. And that's what's happened now in all of these projects, is much like the painted signs. Do I have all the skills to screw wood together and to paint it and to sand it? Absolutely. And to cut out shapes and letters? Yes. And paint it? Yes. And weather it? Yes. I have all those skills, but you know what? I didn't have the permission. Mm-hmm. Like somehow I had to be ordained to have the permission to do it.
Well, today the sign making got even better because we were trying to make letters a certain size, and in walks Molly to pick up Levi.
Molly, my 15-year-old daughter, who's amazing at lettering.
And it's like, well, why don't we just have Molly do it? Because then we don't have to fight with the printer to get the letters to come out. And so then Molly's like, well, do you want me to do it? And we're like, yeah. So she freehands this entire sign.
She freehand out an 8-foot sign.
Yeah.
And then painted it.
Well, and then she says, well, I'm not really good at painting. And I say, as I would, of course, always say, well, there's no time like today to enhance your skill set. Worst
case, we paint over it and we start over.
Yeah, and she nailed it. It's fantastic. And it's even, I mean, your signs are yummy, and the ones that you've built are yummy, and then it gets yummier because
here's
the story of Molly creating this one.
Well, and here's that permission thing. Yeah, Molly, just do it. That's all the permission she needed. She didn't, but I don't know if I'm qualified. I don't know if I have the skill set. I don't know if I have the job requirements to do it. Instead, she just said, okay,
that's all
I'll
the
try
permission
it.
that our team
that's all it needs.
She's an example of what happens every day on the job, where this group of people is creating out of nothing like this magical pool. And with Lazy River too, some of those early meetings were, okay guys, if this was a dream pool that you could imagine, what else could you imagine having at this pool? I mean, have we talked about fire? Because I mean, there's gonna be fire.
Yeah, but there's gonna be fire as well.
So there's one of everything that we could imagine on the Lazy River project.
Well, that whole Molly experience today, recognizing that all the permission she needed was to scooch her into, you can do this, and she just did it.
Well, making these signs, fabricating that, and doing it for a client, if it wasn't a part of our project, and say somebody just needed a sign, they would hire somebody to build a sign
for
hundreds
to
thousands of dollars. That Molly, a 15-year-old, with a little bit of help putting the sign framework together, could do all day long.
And the materials, not the paint, which was all just kind of scrap paint that I found here. The materials were like $19.82.
But then it's the skill set of putting it together and making a cohesive picture.
And the willingness to put it together. I mean, you can have the skill set, but you have to have the willingness part. And we don't talk about the willingness as much as we talk about the skill set. You can have all the skills in the world, but if you're not willing to do something, those skills don't mean anything. And that was something that we saw with Molly today, was she had the willingness to sort of just do it. Yeah. We asked her to do it, and she just performed.
Well, and we've had that experience a lot.
Over
You
and
know,
over.
think about Lena. We had a staircase, and on Pinterest, there's these staircases, and instead of being plain, you paint whimsical things. It's like, hey, Lena, have you ever painted like this? No? Well, do you want to?
Wait, do you have
Yes.
any skills at painting whatsoever? No. Do you want to do this? Sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
our steps are magical.
And-
both sets of steps she did, going from the basement up and then up to the second floor.
Well, and
are
then
sensational.
we tasked her with doing some furniture, which turned out really well. And then Al's like, hey, you think she could paint the boat? So, I mean, think about that. She graduated from high school last year. So, a college freshman. And she works with us at, you know, her schedule that fits in with school. And like, there's a boat like that you would go fishing in, like an aluminum
Rowboat.
rowboat.
It's 12 or 12 foot, I think.
And like, Al puts it in the barn
So
on a couple
paint
of
it.
sawhorses and like, hey, paint this. And the only instruction is make it fun.
Make it cheery and fun.
I mean, no pressure, right?
and it's phenomenal.
And the boat is spectacular.
She nailed it.
So
Yeah.
there's just example after example of whether it's fitting together equipment that needs to all fit into this, you know, 62 pipes coming in and
Yeah,
needs to
with
fit
no
in this
space,
space,
or-
and Mark or you will tackle that. And
Mark has been absolutely magical. We don't talk enough about Mark. We really don't.
yeah,
When it comes to the tasks that I've asked him to figure out how to do in the world of plumbing and making the space work, and Mark has been sensational. I mean, that's just something, you know, he on the service end and all of that of what he does is amazing, but we have not given him space. This time on Lazy River Acres, we've given him as much space as he could possibly need to do everything he needs. But in past years, I think about the 72 pipes coming into a 5x5 room, and he's expected to fit a heater and 3 pumps and a filter and a this and a that, and he stacks them up on top of each other. He's been insanely amazing. But there's yet another example of, you give a challenge, but then you have an expectation of what you want them to do, and they do it. And Mark has done that repeatedly, and I'm trying to make it a little easier on him in terms of space. So this time I gave him 2
well,
buildings.
didn't you give him a lot of space on the last one he plumbed, and then like he crammed it all together
He
or
did.
something?
He crammed it all
Yeah.
together on one end, and we have all this space left over on 2 separate equipment pads. Like, what's all
Which
this
is kinda
space for?
funny.
But that's what he's. I mean, I
Well-
can't blame him, because that is absolutely what I've given him. I've given him something that needed 12 feet to do in 8, and he's done it. So when I give him 12 foot and he only needs 8, he only uses 8.
Yeah. Well, and then, you know, Kyle, as another example, has taken over some of the lighting. So at once upon a time, we had all the vignettes of the lighting, and then there was the grotto lighting, which you did, but now there's the additional lanterns and lighting outside. And Kyle, to this point, didn't really have experience doing that, but he's seen what we do, and he knew enough about how to put wires together
And knows how they
that
work. It works
he
enough.
wired the majority of the boxes, and we got creative with the lights, so they're not all just the same. There's
There's
different
nothing that's even
settings.
close to normal with the lighting.
and different cool things, and then we just
Yes.
got the lanterns done that he'll be tasked with installing. But then we checked in with the team at our last meeting right before Christmas and had everybody reflect on kind of their favorite thought from the year, something that surprised them. And I know Kaylee and Jesse both feel like they grew in that ability, because in the spring, Karen was not on the job with them right
no.
at the beginning, and they really had to step up and do a lot of stuff that they would have looked to her for more guidance on.
And advice on how to do, and they had to do it.
I mean, kudos to her for instilling in them the confidence and some of the skills, and for you and just us in our way of being, that no is not an option, or being worried or coming up with all of that, like, you know, fear and different things. That's not an option either. It's like, well, here's the task, here's what we're doing, And whether or not everybody feels it on the inside right away, they're like, okay, I'll give it what I've got. I'll give it my best.
I think a great example that needs to be spoken and put into words because they all deserve it is this past week. Now, this is really weird to think that we're still doing concrete work in December. It was the last day of December. It was the day before New Year's Eve, so the 30th of December. And here we have scheduled to pour 3 separate parts of patio, which were critical to get done because it would make it easier for us to finish other things. Would we had to have? No, we could have waited until spring, but that would have held off some other stuff. So we had the weather, we had the ground was thawed, everything was perfect. And then the truck shows up and it can't get into the yard. We have a separate access. He pulls 50 feet in and he's buried down, and it's like, let's try to get him out of here. There's no way. And he's able to get the concrete truck, 7.5 yards of concrete, back out onto the road. And I'm like, bring it back up the driveway. We'll figure out how to get it in here. And the team, while everybody could have been crying and whining, why can't we do it this way? Oh, it's going to be really hard. Oh, we can never push the concrete. So literally, the concrete truck comes around the front of the house, puts the chutes on to come down this retaining wall to an existing patio that we have poured. They have to wheel from there along the patio down into a trench and push all the way around the project through a trench that I had dug for the plumbing, the electrical, and the all of the different drainage pipes. They had to wheel through the trench, all the way around the job, out of the trench, down a hill to one patio, around the corner, down the hill to another patio. We were pouring steps, or push out of the trench, turn 360 degrees and push back up the hill to a third pad. And instead of going, oh, we can't do it, we got to they just said, you know what, here's the task in front of us. And I say, guys, look, we're just going to have to do it this way. There's just no other way. I did get the skid steer running in case we had to like run it from the skid steer. That wouldn't have helped us at all because they would have still had to push in an even worse way. But we could have done that if it came down to it. And they just did it. And it goes to mindset that instead of saying, oh, it's too hard, we can't. That was a really interesting experiment in human nature and human willingness, and our team just performed beyond. We needed a few more people that just weren't going to be there. The original thing was to pull the truck right up there and they could just push a little way. We just had a few people to push wheel concrete, and I thought, well, that'll be enough because then we can do what we need to do. When it turned into this monumental task of having to wheel concrete, we really needed 3 or 4 more people to do it, and yet they did it anyway, and we still got it done.
So it was you, Mike, Kaylee, Zach,
and Mark.
Yeah. So 5 people.
5 people.
3 separate pads.
7.5 yards, which isn't some massive amount of concrete, but it's a massive amount of concrete. It would be nothing if you could just wheel and dump right there, but it was pretty massive to think that the 4 of them, Mike Lane had not wheeled in 20 years. 15 years, and certainly wasn't suited to do it, but he said, all right, let's do this. He wasn't expected that day. I needed him for something else, and he's like, give me a wheelbarrow, I'll do the best that I can. And I basically said to him, don't worry if the young kids outrun you, if they lap you, you just do your thing, you get in your game and you do the best that you can do. And he did. And of course, Kaylee and Zach just probably went to the gym afterwards like it was no big deal after working their butts off, but and Mark, same thing, hadn't wheeled in a while. I mean, it's not his normal job, but I had asked him to do it because I knew we needed the extra person. He showed up and he pushed some massive loads of concrete that I can't even imagine. I mean, he way outperformed what I would have imagined he would do, and he just did it. And it's amazing. It's really cool, and it's humbling to witness what they're willing and able to do if you give them a reason, and they deserve the praise. And I don't praise enough, but they deserve the accolade, because while most people may not even recognize what that is, those who have done it realize how massive that is to do and undertake in that particular case. We're talking, I mean, let's just add to it the fact that the ground is kind of soggy, sloppy, gross. We threw whatever we could find, 2x4s, 2x6s, partial sheets of plywood over these mucky trenches to wheel in, and they went and went and went. 7.5 yards is a pretty good amount of concrete on any given day. I mean, when you normally pour concrete, no big deal. But with the extreme, with what this was, it was pretty monumental. I mean, it's something that when I think about, you know, I'm at one end and I'm laying the concrete and I'm doing what I'm doing, but what they did to get it there was pretty sensational.
Yeah. Well, on that note,
well, we better wrap up. And,
let's continue the celebrating the Roaring 20s, the
Yes.
amazing 20s, and more, you know, living legendary. It's just a way of being awesome. It's being your own version of awesome, because that'll give other people to be their own version.
It gives them permission to be their own awesome. And you know what? Our awesomes are not all the same.
No.
It's absolutely the truth. So,
But you're right. It is humbling, and
it is.
and it is monumental to see what our team
What the capacity of people is when they
has been
throw
able
their,
to accomplish.
when they throw their minds and backs and hearts and soul into it. Absolutely. And I guess Briggs is just deciding to take over the camera. So with that,
Cool. We'll
Thumbs
see you
up.
next time.